Today, Mexico celebrates the longest holiday in the world, Guadalupe-Reyes. That's 3 weeks of steadfast drinking and unyielding tomfoolery.
That was the famous and beloved Ron Burgundy of Anchorman fame, talking about what I think might be true. Is it the longest party on Earth? Definitely feels like it.
Anyone who's been a part of the Guadalupe-Reyes marathon knows it's the longest marathon on Earth.
I'm sorry, the what?
That's something to point out that Ron Burgundy is mistaken. It's not the Guadalupe-Reyes, it's the Guadalupe-Tavo.
That's because Octavio Figueroa's birthday, our dear Tavo's birthday, is on the 7th of January, which means it is a full sweep, 2/3 of a month's worth of partying and merriment from the 12th of December, which is the day of the Virgin of Guadalupe, all the way to the 7th, which is his birthday. Some of the heathens around here will only celebrate until the 6th, which is Epiphany, which is in Mexico known as the Three Kings Day. But to me, the 7th is probably the highlight of the Guadalupe-Reyes marathon.
It goes without saying. Now, something that should be pointed out is there are some people, and I don't think we've ever, at least I haven't, been sufficiently committed to the marathon, who extended into a sort of ultra marathon that goes all the way to the 2nd of February on the day of the Candelaria, where we eat the tamales from the Rosca de Reyes. But we'll get into that in a minute. The typical Guadalupe-Reyes, or the correct name, Guadalupe-Tavo, goes on from the 12th of December to the 7th of January.
What I think is weird is that we've got a bit of like holiday creep going on in the same way that you see Santa hanging out in like shopping malls and stuff from like June or something. I've started to feel a bit of creep. I mean, it's already quite a long holiday. And by holiday, I mean holiday, because even though it's not really an official period of time that people are allowed to go off work, you can definitely tell people starting to sort of bunk off. But people start, I'd say, from the 20th of November, which is an actual holiday, which is the Mexican Revolution. It's the celebration of that. And from the stats on the Mexico Political Economist, I can see all you find people start to read less from that moment on. And then it picks up more or less in like February or something. So it really is a long, long holiday. But officially, it does start on the 12th of December. For reasons, I think, that are pretty obvious from the name. It's the El Día de la Virgen de Guadalupe.
I think what's really interesting is most people in the Western, Christian world will know of the concept or be familiar with the concept of things slowing down in the last month of the year and might think, this is not particularly novel, right? But it is very different, because what happens in this marathon starting on the 12th of December is everything starts to very significantly slow down. It's not just like you have a few more social events. It's not that there's a little bit more traffic. It's the whole country slowly grinds to almost a halt as regards business in particular.
Reason for it, because it's Mexico's only real, literal bank holiday, because the 12th of December, the day of the Virgin of Guadalupe, is Bankers' Day in Mexico. So weirdly, I mean, I guess to an extent, because Mexico is such a secular country, and especially from the government, you're not allowed to celebrate any religious holidays or festivities. There is something quite nice about bankers having their main holiday then, which means all of banks close down. The Bank of Mexico grinds to a halt and everyone has, a meal together. And it means that you can't get your money out or do movements or whatever, which means the rest of the country sort of de facto has to stop too. But the real reason, the official reason, of course, is because that's the day that the Virgin of Guadalupe appeared to, they call him Juan Diego the Indian, which I think is very incredibly retro. Basically, Juan Diego was the Spanish name of an indigenous man very few years after the conquest who went up to the hill of Tepeyac, which is in northern Mexico City nowadays. Mexico City proper, that is, not the sprawling north that we all know and love. And he had a vision. The story around this, I think, is controversial and fascinating because it's in a period of time during the post-conquest era of Mexico. It's not quite a viceroyalty yet. The Spanish are still trying to see how they consolidate their empire. And a really big thing, of course, is Catholicism. At first, they thought they were having really great success because the priests would go out and they'd baptize people en masse. Thousands upon thousands of indigenous people willingly coming in to baptize themselves. From the indigenous point of view, it made perfect sense, right? The god of the Christians had won that battle, and so it made sense to align yourself with him. But of course, the issue is, he was just one of many in a pantheon of many, many gods. And so as soon as they got baptized, the priests realized that the indigenous people just went back to their old ways. Not because they'd rejected Christianity or they were faking it, it was just a completely different way of doing religion. And so they felt they definitely needed to do something different. It wasn't about just the one God then. How could you bring people into the fold without basically being heretics? And one of the greatest tools was the tool of the Virgin of Guadalupe. The story, I believe, is as legitimate, and you can tell me whether you think or not, whether you think it is or not, Tavo, but it's as legitimate as virtually any other apparition, I believe, in the Christian world. Juan Diego, I don't have any reason to doubt him per se. A lot of people believe that it's propaganda and that this is all a made-up story by the Catholic Church, but I think ultimately it doesn't matter. The story, as it's broadly told, comes from, obviously, Spanish records 10 years after the conquest of Tenochtitlan, Mexico City. So this is 1531. And between the days of the 9th to the 12th of December, Diego, and let me get his name right, Juan Diego Cuauhtlatoatzin, went up to the hill.
I mean, it's not okay to call him Juan Diego the Indian, but that is a very difficult last name to pronounce.
True, that is true. And he goes up there and he has apparitions of what we would later know as the Virgin of Guadalupe, but to him, as an indigenous person and as a Nahuatl speaker, he knew more as Tonantzin. Tonantzin being the mother figure of the indigenous world at the time. So again, you start to see this crossover even during this great sort of Christian story in Mexico. And so he goes up 4 times, and on the 4th time, he's told to do 2 things. He's told to tell, and I think this is where it gets slightly dodgy, he's told to tell the bishop of Mexico City that she's appeared to him and that they must build a temple on that hill for her. It's not go tell your people, it's go tell the man in charge, and the man in charge is a Spaniard from the Catholic Church. But as proof...
The time of the Inquisition.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So if you got this one wrong, you really went wrong. As proof, though, she said, cut these roses which have mysteriously appeared on the mountain. And now I say it with a bit of cynicism in my voice, but the mystery is sort of part of the point, right? The road that leads towards the great Basilica de Guadalupe, the Guadalupe Basilica, near the site of the apparition, is called La Calzada de los Misterios, the road of mysteries, where you walk and you ponder the mysteries of Christ. And so mysteries aren't something just, like accidental or suspicious. It's something that is part and parcel of this whole thing. And so he's to put his roses, or her roses, into his cloak, basically, and to walk down and to show them to the bishop. And when he does so, the roses fall out, and on his cloak is marked the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, thus proving it completely unquestionably.
And, I mean, there's plenty of things that stand out immediately, right? Of course, the Catholic Church, part of its great success all over the world has been that it's been very good at integrating Catholic scripture with local interpretation and sort of merging those and coming up with something that, suits both sides, thus allowing people to join the Catholic religion relatively willingly.
Yes, absolutely. And ultimately, I don't like this narrative that has become quite popular, which is, the Spanish made up the Virgin of Guadalupe to manipulate the Indians. I think it's quite condescending towards the rest of, the indigenous people who became fast and devoted believers in the Virgin, because ultimately they were still thinking of Tonantzin. The Virgin of Guadalupe is very much an indigenous woman with a lot of indigenous iconography. So one wonders who manipulated whom. Sure, we get a Catholic virgin, but then again, we also might be venerating this Aztec or this indigenous mother goddess right under the noses of the Inquisition. So I think it goes both ways quite nicely.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because, famously, the Virgen de Guadalupe has brown skin. She is known affectionately as La Virgen Morena, the brown, well, not a perfect translation, but the brown virgin.
And a bit of a side note here, That's why it's so important that the party in power created by Andrés Manuel López Obrador about a decade ago is called El Movimiento de Regeneración Nacional, because the acronyms for that are Morena, which many people saw from very, very early on as a bit of a dog whistle to get these sort of like silly people to come to the party without really understanding what they were doing. Again, part of this narrative that the poor clearly never really understand what they're doing, so you can manipulate them through obfuscation, dog whistles.
Of course, Movimiento de Regeneración Nacional, National Regeneration Movement, doesn't really mean anything. But to millions and millions of Mexicans, Morena means a lot, and that is La Virgen de Guadalupe. Now, independently of where this came from and whether the story is true or not, the reality is that the Virgen de Guadalupe is, to many in Mexico, probably more important than Jesus Christ himself. And I'm talking about Catholic worshippers. So much so that the Basilica de Guadalupe receives some years more visitors than the Vatican. On the day of the Virgin, the 12th December, around 9 to 12 million pilgrims will arrive in a single day. Just to be clear, Mexico City proper has around 9 million inhabitants. So for a day, the population will double just because of the pilgrims.
You can really tell, like, forget the bankers. That'll bring your city down to a halt. And almost all the massive roadways in Mexico, you will see from days before, people on bikes, people walking with statues and images of the Virgin. I've just driven up from Puebla, and it was crazy. Like, I was there on the 8th of December, and people were already making their way to Mexico City. Again, right, forget the Vatican. It is the second largest pilgrimage site after Mecca, like the second largest pilgrimage site on earth. And the vast majority of its visitors, or a very large, significant amount of its visitors, arrive between the 9th and the 12th, which is the day of the Guadalupe. There's a wonderful song about the Virgin that people play. Mariachis and every sort of music is played. Every sort of genre plays that song. I'll put it in the show notes so you can listen to it. But yeah, I mean, it's so big that in the 20th century, they had to build this massive basilica, which was visited by John F. Kennedy, because the teeny tiny church that was built in an honor in the 16th century simply wasn't big enough.
And talking about this massive number of people and how the city starts to really slow down because it's just too many people for the city to take, also explains part of why the marathon gets going. It's not just that we have a very good reason to start partying, but also the city really struggles to operate from the 9th to the 12th. And then, of course, all these pilgrims need to leave, so it will struggle to operate as people are leaving.
And it's not just the pilgrims. Because people are devoted to the Virgin of Guadalupe generally, there will be lots of fairs. Near my house, and I'm a good, 14k south of the Basilica, there's a temple to the Virgin, and there's a massive fair in the town square every single year for about a week to commemorate her. And they close off those roads. And so if you think, okay, if I just avoid the Basilica, I'll be fine, you'd be completely wrong.
And on so many levels, right? Because you might not be Catholic, you might not care whatsoever, you might be completely disconnected, and you find a way around the fairs, which is incredibly difficult, but you try. But of course, the people that work maybe for you, the people that work with you, the people that work around you might just not show up because they're very Catholic and they do care, or they can't find a way around.
Also, even if you are atheist, Muslim, Jewish, if you're Mexican, the Virgin of Guadalupe, I think, is actually core to your identity as well. There's a wonderful quote. I'll probably misquote her, but I think it goes more or less like this. And it was said by Margot Glantz, who is probably, I'd say, like one of Mexico's living, like, greatest, like, Jewish writers. And Margot Glantz has a wonderful phrase, which is like, in Mexico, everyone's a Guadalupano. Like, ultimately, everyone in Mexico believes in the Virgin of Guadalupe and is devoted to her because it's part of the Mexican identity beyond religion at this point, which I think is almost like a meta third level to, like, this whole manipulation story. Was it the indigenous manipulating the Spanish? Was it the Spanish manipulating the indigenous? Or does it actually just go beyond religion and is something that goes deeper into the human psyche? I mean, there's a big Freudian debate around the image of the Virgin because the shape of the Virgin herself has been reinterpreted by many sort of feminist artists ever since as a sort of like part of the female anatomy. I shan't go any deeper for fear of offending anyone, but I think there's a large debate going on around that as well.
Certainly, as you say, it's such a massive part of Mexican identity that even those who shouldn't, in theory, be affected by it or devoted to it, ultimately have to deal with it and want to deal with it, because it's the heart of being Mexican sort of everywhere.
So that's day one.
So having passed the birthday, let's say, that's not the only celebration. It's not only that things start to slow down after the 12th and then we say, what the heck, let's just keep going this way. There's actually more events that continue to happen. Of course, the most important that follow are Las Posadas, from the 16th to the 24th. Now, in between all of this, before Las Posadas and during Las Posadas, you have everyone getting together. And this speaks a lot about Mexican culture. Picture sort of a Mexican wedding for those of you who are not Mexican, who have been to a Mexican wedding, and compare it with a British wedding, a French wedding, an American wedding. The latter weddings will have, 70, 100 guests if it's quite large, because you only really invite the people who are, directly close, not like second derivative close to you. But in Mexican culture, you invite everyone and their mother, right? That's also the way in which celebrations around Christmas are done in Mexico. You don't just meet up with your closest friends in your family. You have to meet up with your friends from like primary school and your friends from middle school and your friends from college and your friends from the masters. And then you just have nonstop events every single day. But specifically, Las Posadas are a wonderful celebration. These are 9 days in which neighborhoods all over the country will commemorate the journey of Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem, and all the places where they sought refuge and didn't find refuge until they did eventually find refuge for Jesus to be born.
So this comes from a very specific form of cultural and Christian miscegenation. Hispanic culture was very musical and very theatrical, but so was indigenous culture when the Spanish arrived. And the Spanish realized that it was actually much more effective to communicate these holy stories through theater in which the indigenous people collaborated. Not because, one learns by doing, but because it was culturally significant to them. In the same way that indigenous people performed dances that almost literally invoked the gods, this was a way of getting indigenous people involved, but also to really incorporate Christian beliefs. So we'll be talking about other forms of theater for Christmas and, like the Christian story further down the line. But Posadas are very much part of this. Posadas, to this day, will be a big party, whatever, but if you're a formal sort of family, you will get a candle, you will get a very, very sad-looking booklet that has been used for decades at this point, filled with the different prayers and the songs that one sings and performs at one's own home. And there is a stage for it, and the stage is always your front door. On the inside, some people play the part of the old innkeeper who is sort of deciding whether or not to let Mary and Joseph in. And on the outside, people play the part of Mary and Joseph, or specifically actually of Joseph, who's begging the innkeeper to let them in. And it's a to and fro song where you sing the same song every year to remember this very specific moment of the nativity story.
And the idea is that you go from house to house asking for refuge, and then they'll say, no, go away. And you go to the next one, and they say, oh, no, go away, until eventually somebody gives you posada, somebody gives you refuge. So there's a word for inn, and it serves also for refuge. And it's beautiful because the way it's done, at least the way I grew up seeing it with my grandparents, they would do this just on their street with their neighbors. And it would be like a different person's turn across different years in a particular year to actually host the posada, to be the one who says, yes, come on in. And then when you open the doors and everyone comes in, there's food for everyone, and there's punch, and there's, these little fireworks, and you run around with sparklers, and the kids are involved, and grandparents are involved, and the parents, and it's a beautiful intergenerational community event.
And this, dear listeners, is where the piñata comes from. We've talked about this, I think, in our previous episode about why Mexicans are so good at partying. But this, to remind those who haven't listened to it, is the origin story of the piñata. It is part of these festivities, and it's part of the performance of religious ritual in order for you to mix fun and performance with your beliefs. And so the piñata, with its 7 deadly sins stuck onto this ball like spikes, are beat with a stick, and once you've destroyed the 7 deadly sins, you can jump in and get all the goodies, which nowadays are, like actual sweets, and back in the day used to be incredibly painful, large bits of fruit and like sugarcane, which would fall on your head. Maybe that's why I am like I am.
I mean, I don't know. I definitely like some of the candy, particularly Mexican candy that comes with the piñata, but I really miss getting the fruit. Like, it's one of those things that I think we've really lost, where we used to have tons of sugar cane and you just like chew on it for hours. It was disgusting, but it was delicious. And now you don't get so much of that.
That's true. But it's still around, so you can still experience it in the markets and all that. So those are the posadas, and they're the series of parties that lead up to Christmas. Now, again, there's posada creep as well, because I think that really posadas begin, as you say, 9 days before Christmas, starting on the day after the 12th. However, because people have so many friends and so many different groups of friends, when we no longer live in the village, people have to have a series of extra posadas to just keep all those people accounted for. And so I've already been to a couple of posadas, and it's the 10th of December. So I can see posadas stretching deep into the year as we go forward. And they sort of like go as like concentric circles. The more distant the friendship group, the further away from Christmas you are.
I mean, it's just the journey of Mary and Joseph is getting longer and longer every year.
Exactly right.
But then we come in to the 24th of December. And this is really important because in different Christian places, Christmas is celebrated in slightly different days, or like the big event is on different days. And in Mexico, the big dinner, like sort of the big momentous moment, is on the 24th of December, on Nochebuena.
Christmas Eve.
Christmas Eve. Now, on this day, some people will still go to work sometimes, but for the most part, most companies will just say, you know what, you're not really going to do anything, even if you do come, so just don't show up. I mean, even if people do go, they will leave very early because everyone needs to be ready for the big festivity on the 20th.
And by ready, we mean a nap, because if you're getting ready at like lunchtime, you are way too early, because these celebrations start well after the sun has set.
And they continue quite deep into the night.
What I think is fascinating about Mexican Christmas Eve, and ultimately it's a tradition that is being lost, is another part of these theatrical traditions that Mexicans have. If you have La Posada and the songs that go with La Posada in the lead up to Christmas Eve, on Christmas Eve, you have the performance of the birth of the baby Jesus. And that is conveyed through La Pastorela. Now, pastorelas, theatrical performances that basically all have the same structure. Like, it's exactly the same thing that happens, because obviously you're telling the same story over and over again. And what you do is you have just different foibles, and it's a different sort of farce every time. And it's always a farce. It's the story of peasants who are getting on with their lives and screwing up. Some of them are greedy, some of them are lazy. It's all the 7 deadly sins represented as the peasantry. And then the devil comes up and he tries to make them worse, right? To make them greedier, to make them lazier. And then eventually what happens is Angel Gabriel comes down, defeats the devil, and announces that they must go and seek the new Lord under the star. And so it's always a comedy. It's always great fun. People dress up, and it's very much a Mexican tradition that is based in this pre-Hispanic tradition of theatrical ritualism. So it's Spanish people coming in and finding that's the best way to convert indigenous people at the time, and it's become and maintained its tradition, and we've sort of maintained this tradition centuries later as a sort of Christmas time tradition. And at least in my household, we do a pastorela every single year on Christmas Eve.
It's fascinating. I didn't know the specifics of that. I mean, I used to do pastorelas as a kid, and I had no idea why I was being made to do all of this.
Yeah,
mostly because it wasn't
know.
a piñata at the end, so I didn't care.
Really?
I know.
There was always a piñata at the end of my school time pastorelas.
At the school, yes, that's true. Any hoodles. Now we get ourselves to the 25th. And I don't know how you feel about this, Alex, but my perspective is that between the 25th and the 31st, it's sort of a haze.
Yeah.
You don't, nobody really goes to work. I mean, some people, I suppose, go to work from the 26th to the 31st, maybe. But you continue to have all of these parties, like meet up with friends and family and the distant family and so on. that just doesn't allow for proper work to happen. So I remember actually when I was working at the Mexican Central Bank, and during the first year, you couldn't take vacation. You had to sit there all year round. And when December came along, you had the whole group of people who were in their first year who, well, we couldn't take vacation, so we're just sitting there right across from the 12th of December to the 7th. And it was extraordinary because there was no one. It was only a bunch of kids who just started, and we just had to man the stations, but nobody was there. It was the most ridiculous thing in the world. And you walked around the historic downtown and it was packed because people are doing all sorts of shopping for gifts and for all these big celebrations. But no one's actually working except the people selling to the people who are buying all the stuff.
That sounds very Lord of the Flies at the Bank of Mexico.
It definitely was.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. You have skipped, of course, probably the most important day for Mexicans on this long marathon, which is the 25th isn't at all a religious occasion. There are no theatrics, there are no plays. It is mostly a day that one sits down to eat el recalentado, which is the day in which everyone gets back together, sometimes virtually the same group of people that met up the night before to open presents and do the pastorela and went to bed at 6 a.m., or they meet for lunch the next day to eat exactly the same food because, of course, everyone's bought an enormous amount of food that no human group could possibly finish. And so the day after that is dedicated to putting the work in of eating the food that was left over. Now, Mexican Christmas food is very specific and it's again, a fascinating mix of Spanish and indigenous because Mexican Christmas food will involve things like romeritos, which is, I think people don't like this very much, but it's a strange little weed. I don't even know how to describe it. Mixed in with mole and prawns and just a bunch. It's a weird concoction. I quite like it, but I can see why people don't. And then there's also cod. It's a very traditional thing to have on Christmas Eve. Cod coming from usually the Spanish-owned tiendas de abarrotes, which is like the sort of the convenience stores set up by Spanish immigrants who brought with them Norwegian cod, salted cod. So a big part of like the traditional lead up to Christmas is steeping the cod in fresh water to get rid of all the salt.
I do have to say, that talks about something very sad, which is just the destruction of our fisheries and how we have lost track of just how bad that is. Because cod, the cod that the Spanish and the Portuguese famously have eaten for centuries, didn't come from Norway, right? It came from the fisheries around Spain and Portugal. Yes. But so much cod was eaten in that peninsula for so many hundreds of years that those fisheries are essentially gone. So now we need to go up north to Norway to bring down the traditional cod.
But what you could do in the 21st century is freeze the cod and bring fresh cod. But no, the tradition is you have to have the salted and desalted cod, which I think is a weird and fascinating tradition. And then, of course, people love to have different other things. People have this disgusting apple salad, which people insist on bringing, full of fruit and raisins, which I think is revolting. And then we'll have 3 servings of. But I think it's conceptually a horrible thing to have.
I will stop you right there because I make one in which you add just a dash of sparkling wine, and it really just changes it completely. We're going to have it together.
Everything is a dash of sparkling wine with you, Tavo.
At least a dash.
especially in the Guadalupe-Reyes marathon. So yes, I interrupted you with food. So yes, after the recalentado, I think you're absolutely right. It is just a blur.
But I fully agree. I think it's an important interruption because the recalentado, I think, to so many people, my wife included, is a lot more important than the meal the day before. Like, sure, you made this massive turkey, sure you have cod, sure you have whatever you want, but it's all about las tortas de recalentado, the sandwiches of recalentado. And as you say, there's so much food made for the 24th. It tastes better, yes. Better, yeah. But there's so much that I find that's part of what, fills in the haze. It's not just the 25th. Oftentimes you're still having recalentado on the 28th.
Delicious. Then, of course, there's New Year's Day, and I think that's the most globalized holiday in Mexico. I think people still have New Year's Day with their families, but increasingly people go out with friends. It's a sort of more American-style day that people go out and drink champagne and hang out with their friends. I guess the weirdest thing about Mexican New Year's Eve are the grapes. I don't know where else they do that.
I think they
You
do
wanna
it in
explain the grapes?
Spain as well. Yeah, the grapes are a weird thing. You basically have, well, depends, it changes a little bit by house. I don't know what the official rule is. Okay, so you have these grapes, and Alex just helped clarify it for me. That it's 12 grapes, one for every strike of the clock as the clock strikes midnight, right? And it's this extraordinary thing where you're supposed to, with every strike of the bell, shove a grape in your mouth and presumably chew it and swallow it. Now, the bell takes a second. I don't know how fast people usually chew and swallow grapes, but it takes me several seconds. So obviously, by the time you're around like bell number 8, you're a chipmunk. Your mouth is completely stuffed with grapes. You can't possibly fit another one in your mouth, but that's the tradition.
It's a holly jolly choking hazard.
And also, like, the grapes keep getting bigger. Like, the hormones we're putting in the grapes, I don't know. And they just keep getting bigger and bigger. And, like, sure, they're great because they don't have any of the seeds inside. But now, like, you can't fit more than 2, honestly.
It's like 5 grapes in one. It's a massive. So basically,
exactly.
most of New Year's Eve is spent around these grapes and just, like, looking at them and dredging them. Because they're sitting at the table, 12 grapes at every place, gazing at you like big green eyeballs, expectantly waiting for you to choke on them within a few hours' time.
But anyways, you do that, and the idea generally is that, you have a wish with every one of your grapes about things that are going to happen in the new year, or things that you're thankful for, things that, you look forward to, and so on. And what follows is just your normal party. And the rest of the days after that, from the 5th all the way, from the 1st to the 5th of January, bit of a haze. Even if you still go to work, you're going to work, no one's there. No one really expects anything of you. Nothing really moves. But that brings us on to the 6th.
The 6th is an interesting one because, of course, everyone knows about the 3 wise men. Everyone knows about their arrival, the gifts they give to the baby Jesus, all that. What I think is very frustrating for a lot of Mexican children is, with the arrival of Santa and this concept that you should be getting presents on the 24th, there's become a divide across Mexico, which is, do you get your presents on the 24th? Or do you have to wait all the way until the 6th of January to get any presents? And the more traditional families will wait, and you can see this division amongst these poor children as the time goes on. But that is still, the tradition. Especially staunchly Catholic families think that Santa is, Coca-Cola heathen. And so they will wait until Epiphany, which is the day that the baby Jesus got gifts. And no one's getting presents until Jesus does.
Quite right.
And that's that, really. I mean, there's nothing left. That's the end of the whole marathon.
Except 2 very important things, Alex. On the 6th, you have forgotten La Rosca de Reyes.
Another choking hazard.
Another massive choking hazard. It's this cake thing. It's circular, like a massive donut. And it's got like quince cheese and guava cheese on top of it.
Are we hobbits? Are we hobbits?
Basically, for about 30 days, for about 20 days in December and in January, we were definitely hobbits. And if you weren't sufficiently stuffed by the 5th of January, on the 6th, you all get together and you will have a slice of this rosca, of this cake thing, which is sort of spongy. And everyone enjoys that, and you have it with hot chocolate or champurrado or atole or whatever you want to do. But the interesting thing is that somewhere in this cake, there is un niño Dios. There is a baby Jesus in plastic form somewhere hidden in there. And whoever gets the slice with the baby Jesus has both won and lost. Because that means that in La Fiesta de la Candelaria on the 2nd of February, because all these parties weren't enough, you need to buy tamales for everyone who was at that rosca, and you're going to come together and have those tamales together.
Part of this lovely cyclical nature, right? Because the Candelaria brings Christmas to an end all the way, like, in the depths of February, basically. But I think there's something wonderful about that, because it's part of keeping these traditions alive. And of course, I was joking when I said that it all ended on the 6th, because really, no real cycle is complete without a celebration of one's best mate and co-host. Tavo Figueroa was born on the 7th of January, many years ago, and people continue to look up to the sky and look for that star that announced his birth all those years ago. I, for one, love to raise a glass feeling bloated and disgusting after having partied and eaten my way through the previous month. I always do my best to raise a glass in his honor on the 7th of January to really mark the end of the Guadalupe-Tavo marathon.
Cheers to that. And on the eve of this Guadalupe-Tavo, this was Tavo Figueroa.
And I'm Alex Gonzalez-Omrod.
And this is Mexico, the podcast.
Every 2 weeks, we talk about what makes Mexicans Mexican, what traditions they celebrate, and how they're doing Christmas this year.
Subscribe to the Mexico Political Economist, give us a like, leave us a comment, and please enjoy yourself in this Guadalupe-Tavo.
With moderation. Take care. Bye for now.